So this is Loom. Loom is a 4-channel delay looper. And maybe I should say a looper delay. What it does is utilize play once loopers to record material, which can be pitched and reversed and that sort of thing. And then it uses delay lines to create the regeneration loop for those loopers. And there's some interesting ways in which those delay lines can interact with one another. They can be set to different delay times, which creates phasing and, sort of polyrhythmic feels. The delay lines can be ducked by the output of the looper. The regeneration can, so you can have new material sort of suppress old material in the delay line. And you can also blur them, which is sort of a Cosmos style approach to the feedback, where the feedback from channel 1 can be sent to channel 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and 4 back to 1. So you get these delay lines, particularly when they're set to different times, that sort of spread all around the stereo field. So it's a little bit like Cosmic Loops. If you played with that patch, it's a little bit like a sort of live action airport loops in some ways. I adore it. So I think if your sensibilities are anywhere close to mine, I've tried to record this a bunch over the past few days, and each time I turn on the patch, I just sort of get lost playing rather than sitting down and doing this stuff. So, I enjoy this one a lot. So I'm going to start on the right side of the controls, and I'll just note that there are some important controls on a second page. I'll also note that I have 2 forks for this patch that I'll talk about briefly at the end. They're just sort of expanded versions of certain features. So the right side of the patch deals all with the recording process. Up here we have wet and dry controls, but otherwise this side is devoted to recording into the buffers. And the way that it does that is using a envelope follower to gate a VCA. And that VCA is fed into the loopers, which are selected through a few different processes. But right at the top, you have a threshold amount, and that's where you'd sort of set the amount of sound you need to trigger this envelope follower gate. And there's a sensitivity control. This is actually an insensitivity control. And what I mean by that is you push the insensitivity, what this does is create a Schmidt trigger for the comparator. When the audio exceeds the threshold to drop below the comparator being high drops from that initial threshold to a lower one. And what that does is sort of keep the audio, if you've ever messed around with trying to use an envelope follower into a comparator, the envelope follower's output can be noisy because a signal can be noisy. It has little perturbations in amplitude. Even a decaying sound has a wiggle to it, and that can cause the gate to jump up and down around the threshold and create unwelcome glitchiness. So the Schmidt trigger sort of works to smooth that out, and the more sensitivity you dial in, the more the Schmidt trigger's minimum threshold will be dropped. So, I have it set to about 0.2. That's a pretty good amount for me because it means, basically the audio that will cause the comparator to fall low will be about 80% of what causes it to trigger in the first case. So, when you start talking about decays and that sort of thing, it's going to be a less powerful signal. The comparator, when it goes high and creates this gate, gates an ASR envelope, which is on this second row. And there are a couple of reasons I included the envelope. The first is, let me just dial in some attack. And I'm using one channel right now. I'll talk about the channels in a second, but I'm using this yellow channel. So I play a note, and you hear the attack is sort of cut off. So, if you want to dial in sort of a swell sound, you can. The other advantage of this is that the sustain section is not actually a sustain section in the sense that it stays high. It sets an amount that the gate, that the envelope produces when it's high. Instead, this is a hold sustain section. So this is sort of like a grace period after the comparator drops low. And so, it can keep the sort of gate open a little bit longer, which can help with decaying sounds. It can make it so if you want to play a few notes in succession that might drop below the threshold in that succession, they'll still come through because the ASR will be sustained for a little bit. Each of these stages goes up to 3 seconds, I should point out, which seemed like really too much in most scenarios, but I thought it gave some flexibility. So here I have just a very little bit of sustain dialed in. And then there's a release output, which again, if you have a sound that you want to let sort of die out, it can help create a more natural decay in that. I keep it pretty minimal, but you can play around with all of this stuff if you want. And then right here we have an output that shows the actual envelope. If I can. And we see that little release stage. If I increase the attack, we'll get a different output. So, just a little bit of attack and a little bit of release go a long way. But, dial those into what feels right for you. So the bottom half deals with the different methods or modes for recording. There's what I call single channel recording and multi-channel recording. Single channel recording can function under a number of different approaches. So right now we're using the manual approach. And these buttons are all mirrored in the stomp switches down here. So with manual, I can choose, I'm going to do something real quick. I'll explain what I did in a second. I can switch to a different channel. This one is pitched down. And I can use the stomp switch to advance that. I should be able to use the stomp switch to advance that. Well, I'll have that fixed by the time this comes out. Assume the stomp switch advances that because I will have that fixed. I don't know what happened there, but that's a pretty easy fix to get this stomp switch doing what it's supposed to do. But you can use this button called manual to advance through different channels manually. So if you wanted to record a few things in one channel and then switch to another, you could do that with the manual approach. The default is envelope, and what that does is each time the envelope fires, when it concludes, it'll move on to another channel. So I'm just going to play the same note again, moving through channels. And I have one channel pitched down a fifth and two channels pitched up an octave with one of them reversed right now. That's what you're hearing. And then there's an LFO mode or clocked mode. It responds to tap tempo. You can tap in this button or this stomp switch. That one does work. Okay. And it'll go through the channels sequentially. The recording is still determined by the envelope. That's when recording begins, but where that audio is directed switches in accordance with the LFO. So if I start, it can yield some pretty interesting glitchy results, especially once you start dealing with the delay buffers. And then there is an option to have a random progress instead of this sort of sequential progress. So I switched it back to envelope mode. That's not really interesting in the manual mode where you want to have sort of control over what channel you play, but in the envelope and clocked mode, let me put it back in clocked mode. You can get some interesting results, I think. So that's the single channel mode. There's also a multi-channel mode, and these work in conjunction. If you want to disable the single channel mode, there's this button called auto progress that you can turn off. So if that's off and none of these buttons on the bottom are selected, nothing gets recorded, which can also be useful if you find some pattern that you want to play over. But in multi-channel mode, I can select whatever channels I want to record into. And I can select up to all four. Which can be a bit much here just now. But you can also use these in conjunction. So you could have two channels that you wanted to always record into, and then the other two channels, based on the approach that you used, might be recorded into or might not. So it got really fixated with these channels that weren't open, but on that last example, it selected the open channel, so you only heard these two that were selected. So there are a lot of different ways to record into the loopers. I'll point out that the loopers have a buffer limit of 16 seconds, which is quite a lot. But also, if you record into them, like in this multi-channel mode, if I try to record before the buffer concludes playing, it'll cut itself off, which can be an interesting effect, but it's something to keep in mind. So in the multi-channel modes where you're recording, sort of in succession on that same channel, you can have, right? Like as soon as I started playing that second note, it cut off the first one because it wasn't done playing. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm going to switch it back to, why did I do that? This single channel one. But I have it fixed on this first channel. It would be the same as if I turned off auto progress and just pressed this button. So you can use them sort of interchangeably. Um, and again, in conjunction, and there's some interesting possibilities there. So I have just one channel active right now. And I'm going to go through what you can do with that channel. At the top, we have a pitch control, so I can change the pitch. Say I want it to pitch up a fifth. I can put it in reverse. I'll talk about time in a second. Channels 1 and 4 have pan positions. 2 and 3 are panned slightly off center, left and right. These ones have fully adjustable pan positions, so I can change the stereo position. And we'll hear more of that in a second. And then these buttons at the bottom are called erase. What they do is they just close the feedback loop. So when something is erased, you'll hear it one last time before it's erased, because this deals with how it's regenerated, not with how it's output. So just keep that in mind when you're using the erase buttons. But basically all they do is drop a channel to 0 feedback automatically. But we do have a master feedback control, which covers all 4 channels. And we have a max time control. The delay lines can go up to 15 seconds. So we have a max time, and then for each channel we have a time percent. And that's a percentage of that maximum time. So, I use these notes because it's sort of easier for me to conceptualize, but let me change those back into numbers. So this channel 4 is 100% of the max time. So whatever the max time is, this channel will play back. Its buffer will be that long. But this one's only 72%, so it'll be shorter. And the advantage of that is that you, like I said at the beginning, you can get these really interesting sort of phase relationships between channels, and lots of interesting interactions with their times. You could also set everyone to 100%, and then they'd all play back, if you wanted to do like a pitch delay thing, or, you can use more standard percentages, like 0.5 would be 50% of the max time. And if you have a couple channels on that and a couple channels on one, then they play twice as often as the channel 1. What I'm going to do is just sort of show off quickly. I'm going to turn the feedback down a little bit, but generally the feedback, if you're like me, you want it pretty high. I'm going to switch this back to envelope mode. So each time I play a new note, it'll be recorded into a new buffer. This is moving sequentially through the buffers. And we have 4 buffers. The first one is unity pitch, but reversed. The second one is down a fifth. This is an octave up in reversed, and this is an octave up with no reverse. And I'm just going to let you sort of get a sense of what's happening here with these different delay time percentages. So I'm just going to play some pretty simple stuff, and we're going to hear what happens. Now let's juice this delay time some. And you can hear some, when you change the max delay time, there aren't pitch artifacts, but you'll hear some weirdness. I'm just going to erase these channels right now. So you get an idea. There are a ton of ways to set up those delay times and pitches and different recording options to create all sorts of, I think, pretty interesting soundscapes. And, you know, like I said, I get lost. I sort of think of it as like, if you ever watched Friday Night Lights and Explosions in the Skies work on the soundtrack, it kind of like automatically sends me into that zone personally. So this is the second page. I already talked about auto progress. Again, if you want to turn off the single channel recording, you would turn off auto progress. But as I pointed out, there are situations where it doesn't interfere with the multi-channel approach. There's a ducking amount. And ducking is kind of interesting. I'm going to bring everything back down to I'm going to go back to using one channel. I've got the delay time set pretty short. So I'm just using this first channel here. And hopefully we can hear the ducking effect when I play a couple of notes in succession. Actually, you'll be able to hear it if I play the input long enough, because it'll start ducking itself when it regenerates. It's kind of an interesting effect. And so that's the ducking control. You have an amount. The ducking can be pretty intense. So, you know, for really subtle effects, you really do want to dial it back a fair amount. And then you have an attack and decay for the envelope follower that's used to duck these outputs. Then there's another interesting effect called blur, which I talked about briefly, where the feedback from one channel is sent to the next, and so on. One thing to keep in mind about blur is that in normal operation with blur off, you can set feedback to 100% and it will just loop indefinitely. But blur can be a situation where you want to watch the feedback because of the way that the gain is distributed through channels. Panning, it uses panners to move from one channel to another. And panning laws are weird. I chose the negative 4.5 decibel law because the linear one just caused stuff to die out, and the other one that I can't remember the name of caused things to get really loud. So this seemed like the best compromise, but you might want to watch your feedback levels when you're using blur. I'm going to set it to 20% or something like that, because I'm still going to record into one channel, but because the next channel has a different time amount and so on, you get these sort of echoes that are at different relationships of time to the original signal. So I don't know if you're hearing that. Let me boost this a little bit. Put it at 25%. So you get this sort of smearing multi-tap effect. As the output is regenerated in different lengths of time. And if we push this all the way to 100%, then what'll happen is we'll get a sort of a kind of ping pong effect. And it'll be regenerated at different speeds. I can make that a bit more dramatic by panning this more and by making some of these times a little bit more dramatic. So there's a lot of different ways you can use all of these things together. I'm going to have some audio clips after this to sort of try and show those off. But real quickly, I'll talk about the forks that I mentioned. So the first one is, I'll go to the second one. Loom XT Extended Ducking is the original patch. It's the first version of this patch that I made, and the version that I'm calling just straight Loom is a sort of a refinement of that. And the major difference here is that there's no blurring, but the delay lines are now 30 seconds. My original idea was really sort of like vast, long soundscapes, so that you still have the ducking effect, but you don't have the blurring effect. And the delay lines go much longer, from 15 seconds to 30 seconds. So you can get some really sort of complex evolving stuff out of that. Not that you can't out of Loom. 15 seconds is a really long time when you're actually like working with it. But if you want to go even further, you can use the ducking. And then Extended Blur, BL, has the blurring, but it doesn't have the ducking. It has a couple of additional controls on this second page. There's a smear amount, which sort of just smooths out the blurring of the delay lines so that they're less likely to fall into sort of resonant spaces. You can get some kind of humming or whining in certain situations. It's not really a big deal, but this makes the blurring more washy so that certain frequencies aren't heard as profoundly. And then there's a warble effect, which is just sort of a tape-ish style modulation of the delay lines. Because the delay lines are modulated in this one, when you adjust the max time or any of the times, you'll get a pitch artifact thing, sort of thing. And that may be desirable, it may not. With delay lines that long, when you start messing around with pitch, you get all sorts of stuff. But yeah, that's Loom. Those are the two versions of Loom. Or the three versions. Sorry, this is longer than I expected it to be. I was hoping to do like a real smash job, but it turns out there's a lot to talk about with this patch because I think it has a ton of possibilities. This is really like I said, it's taken me quite a while to sit down and make this demo because I keep just picking up my guitar or piano or whatever and getting lost for a while. So, that's Loom in all of its versions, with me muddying the waters with forks and whatnot. But those forks are I think they can be useful in specific settings. I think the major one, Loom, just on its own, is sort of the one to check out first. But there are those forks if you want to dive deeper into longer delay times. And So yeah, that's the patch. If you like the patch, go on Patch Storage and like it. I need to stop doing this at the end of the video. Uh, but if you're still watching, go on Patch Storage, like the patch. I know that sounds silly, but it really does mean a lot to me as a patch creator to see my work appreciated in a public way. A lot of people reach out to me with messages, and I want to say to them, that's great. And I appreciate all those messages. But please let other people know, you know, because it can feel like, yeah, a little lonely out there sometimes. So yeah, check out patch storage if you like the patch. I've got a bunch of stuff on Bandcamp. There's links below. Um, yeah, all sorts of stuff. You can find me if you want to talk shop. I'm on Discord and Reddit and around. Um, but yeah, have a good day. I hope you enjoy this patch as much as I do, which is a lot. And now I'll do some sound examples. So the first place I thought I'd start with some examples is just what I've decided to use as the default setting for releasing Loom. We're in single channel recording using the envelope mode. Uh, the As you watched in the demos, I was using 4 channels. One is at unity, but reversed. One is down a fifth. One is up an octave and reversed, and the last one is just up an octave. There's a little bit of ducking set and a little bit of blurring set, and the max delay time is pretty high, about 11-12 seconds, and most of the time percentages are pretty close to that. So this is just sort of like a quick guide to ambient soundscapes. I'm going to play some pretty simple major chord stuff, I guess, and we'll hear what happens. Turning the threshold up just a little bit. at the end here, I turned on bar 2, which is a reverb patch I made. Just to add an additional level of ambience. But I hope this demonstration shows like how quickly you can sort of weave together something that sounds, I think, really good. I switched at a certain point to the LFO mode to just sort of add some glitchy. I chose a pretty slow setting, so not too glitchy, but just some more abrupt sounds to the mix as it sort of cycled through the buffers and recorded different things. So that's example 1. So this example is using Loom as kind of a pitch shifter. I have all of the channels open and all of their feedbacks cut out. Time is set to 0, and I've got them pitched to a major chord. So, and I've added some attack, and I've increased the threshold a fair amount. So basically the idea is I'll play a note, and a major note will sort of fill in behind it, fade in behind it. Now I can start adding time to this. Let's change these percentages around a little bit. I'm not going to be super specific about it. And then the notes will fade in one after another. And then we can add some feedback and some blurring. Let's change these around a little bit. Just so the order's a little bit different. When I change the time percentages, the different notes will come in at different points in the buffer, or with different buffer lengths. Let's just take that attack off now. We can start reversing some stuff. So that's another fun way to use the patch, or a few of them, I guess, once you start messing around with all the stuff that I did. This is sort of a variation on the pitch shifting, I guess. All of the delay times are set to the max %, so they're all equal length. which means the sort of output of the buffer will be equal in length. They're set to different pitches. This one's down a fifth and reversed, and this one's up a fourth, and this one's up a octave and reversed. And then I've selected the clocked mode in random for the recording method. And so you're going to hear something recorded that's going to be broken up and played back at different pitches and different playback directions. So now let's start messing around with the time percents. Let's blur some. Let's just increase the speed. So that's another one. So this is another way to use the patch. What I've got, all of the channels are recording at unity pitch. And I've set the method of advancement to envelope, and they have different time percentages. So this is just going to sort of get into the phasing qualities that are possible real simply. My cat's watching birds over here. I can set some of these to reverse. Adding some blurring. This is a kind of reverse. All of the channels are set to unity pitch. All of them are reversed. All of them have the max time percent. The time is set to 3 seconds, close to that. Let's see. Bring up the sustain just a little bit. And then it's moving sequentially through the channels using the envelope recording mode. So. So for this one, I have the dry killed. The delays are all set to different lengths. Two of them are pitched down an octave with one of them reversed. Two are pitched up an octave with one reversed. And you'll get sort of an octave feel thing to it. There's a little bit of blurring going on, a little bit of ducking, and after a little bit, I'll turn on the bar 2 patch.